I just returned from the most amazing 10-day trip of my life. Drinks, beaches, and no worries. During those squandered hours, my neighbor, who is the president of my HOA, called the police, hired 3 different locksmiths, and yelled at my garage door due to the fact that her vehicle got stuck in my garage. She was unaware that I was 3,000 meters away, watching every meltdown on my phone. The best paid entertainment I've ever had. Netflix wasn't even necessary for me. Has anyone else ever had their parking space stolen? Tell me where you're viewing from in the comments section. If it was a power-tripping HOA, extra points, because this isn't just a story about a parking space that was stolen. It's about entitlement, vanity, and the consequences of someone who believes they are in charge of the neighborhood. Hold on tight. Let me now explain how this entire lovely mess came to be. I'm Connor Walsh, and I work from home doing computer maintenance. Fixing laptops and configuring small business networks is all that's involved. About 2 years ago, I purchased my home in Maplewood Heights, a charming little neighborhood where people get along well, or so I believed. Since I only have one car, I used the 2-car garage that came with the house for storage and my workshop. Up until last Monday morning, when I heard this weird rumbling noise coming from my garage, everything was quiet. I thought I may see a raccoon or something when I went outside, but instead I saw a silver Honda Civic parked in my second berth as if it owned the space. It just sat there like it belonged, not halfway in or obstructing anything significant. The car featured a stick-figure family decal on the back window, was clean, and was quite recent. You are aware of the kind. For a full minute I stood there looking at it, wondering whether I was still dreaming. However, I had no idea how the unusual car got into my garage, and it was obviously there. Determining the owner of this car was the sensible first step. In order to gaze up and down the street, I went around to the front of my house. I saw an elderly woman watering her garden in the house directly across from mine, but the majority of my neighbors were already at work. I had previously seen her, but we had never had a meaningful conversation. I had heard that her daughter, who resided with her, was a major player in the HOA. Deborah Langston was that daughter, and boy, was I going to learn a lot about entitlement. After a few minutes, this woman in her late 30s answered the front door when I knocked. Her hair looked like she had just rolled out of bed, and she was dressed in a crumpled t-shirt and outdated yoga trousers that had seen better days. Her look, however, was what really caught my attention. It seems that my presence on her world was bothering her. She crossed her arms and gave me a judgmental up and down stare before I could even say anything. I said, "Hi," attempting to be courteous. She didn't even blink when she said, "I'm Connor from across the street. I think your car might be in my garage by mistake." Instead, like she was getting ready for combat, she stepped out onto the porch and shut the door behind her. She said, "Oh, honey," in a patronizing manner that made my skin crawl. You'd think she was declaring she was the Queen of England when she added, "I'm HOA president. I know exactly what I can do and where I can park." I made an effort to speak, quietly, but it's my garage, it's on my land after all. She genuinely chuckled as if I had just told her the most hilarious joke she had ever heard. "Provide me with the authorization to utilize unoccupied community space," she said, pulling an old garage door remote out of her pocket and waving it around like a trophy. Until then, I'm parking there. End of discussion. I watched her wave that remote and felt something click in my brain. That wasn't my remote. I had both of mine sitting on my kitchen counter. This woman was using an old remote probably left behind by the previous homeowner, to access my garage without permission. She wasn't Jay sorry about this mess. He glanced at Deborah, who immediately bristled. "Walter, this doesn't concern you," she snapped. But Walter just smiled sadly and looked back at me. Last year, she made me tear down my bird fountain because it wasn't community standard. Took me 20 years to get that fountain perfect, and she had it gone in a week. Deborah's face turned red. That fountain was an eyesore, Walter, and you know it. Some people just don't understand community standards. She turned back to me with renewed confidence. "Look, Connor, I'll keep parking there until you learn to share community resources properly. Maybe this will teach you some social responsibility." With that, she turned around and walked back into the house, slamming the door behind her. Walter and I stood there in stunned silence for a moment. "She's been like this since her divorce 6 months ago," Walter whispered. "Lost her big house in the settlement, had to move back in with her mother. She's been taking it out on the whole neighborhood ever since." I thanked Walter for the information and walked back to my house, my mind already racing. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding or neighborly dispute. Deborah Langston had deliberately chosen to target me, using her HOA position as a weapon to bully someone she perceived as an easy victim. She had no legal right to park in my garage. She knew it, and she was counting on me being too passive to fight back. Right then, I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Time to give Deborah exactly what she wanted. The next morning, I woke up to find not only was Deborah's Honda still in my garage, but she'd also left a McDonald's cup and some wadded-up napkins on my workbench. The audacity was almost impressive. She wasn't just parking in my space, she was treating it like her personal storage unit and trash can. But that wasn't even the worst part. When I checked my email, I found a message that had been sent to every single resident in Maplewood Heights HOA. The subject line read, "Urgent neighbor refuses to share parking. Community safety concern." The email was a masterpiece of manipulation and lies. Deborah claimed that I was antisocial and potentially dangerous, that I was hoarding community resources, and that my aggressive behavior toward HOA leadership was creating an unsafe environment for families. She painted herself as a concerned leader, trying to protect the neighborhood from a difficult resident who couldn't understand basic community cooperation. The email was full of official-sounding language and fake legal references, clearly designed to make other neighbors think she knew what she was talking about. I printed out every single page of that ridiculous email and taped them to my garage door like an art installation. "Community education exhibit," I wrote at the top in big black marker. "Local HOA president demonstrates modern gaslighting techniques." If Deborah wanted to play the public opinion game, I was happy to let everyone see exactly what she was working with. But I wasn't going to stop there. I had a much better plan brewing. While Deborah was busy spreading her poison through the neighborhood grapevine, I was online researching smart garage door systems. See, my computer repair background meant I knew a thing or two about electronic security systems, and I'd been thinking about upgrading my old garage door opener. Anyway, I found exactly what I needed, a high-end smart lock system that could be controlled remotely through a phone app and programmed with custom timer functions. Perfect for someone who might want to, say, give a trespasser exactly enough rope to hang themselves with. I ordered the system with next-day delivery and spent the evening reading installation manuals and programming guides. This wasn't just about getting Deborah's car out of my garage anymore. This was about teaching a lesson to someone who thought she could use her position to bully innocent people. Walter came over while I was unloading the boxes from my car, and when I explained what I was planning, his whole face lit up like Christmas morning. "You're actually going to lock her car in there?" Trying not to chuckle too much, he said, "Connor, that's fantastic. She's been terrorizing this neighborhood for months, and everyone's too scared to stand up to her because she threatens to find people for every little thing. He told me about Martha Dean, Deborah's best friend, who lived 3 houses down. Martha was a real estate agent who spent her days spreading gossip and backing up whatever story Deborah was selling. Together they'd created this atmosphere of fear where neighbors were afraid to even trim their hedges without checking the HOA handbook first. Installation took me most of the next day, but by evening I had a state-of-the-art smart lock system that could be controlled from anywhere in the world. The beauty of it was that from the outside it looked exactly like the old system. Deborah would never know anything had changed until it was too late. I programmed it with a special timer function. After activation, it would run normally for exactly 7 days, then lock down completely until I manually overrode it. The system was now armed and ready, just waiting for the perfect moment to spring the trap. Ira returned from work around 6 that evening and went straight to her garage space. Like she owned the place. She'd started bringing more personal items, an old folding chair, some storage boxes, even a small cooler. She was actively moving in, turning my garage into her personal extension. I watched from my kitchen window as she arranged her stuff and tested the garage door, completely oblivious to the fact that she was now operating a completely different system. Around 7, she brought 3 of her friends over for what she called a garage tour. I could hear them laughing and talking as Deborah showed off how she'd improved my workspace organization. "This is so much better," one of them said. "Connor should actually thank you for fixing his mess." Another friend seemed uncomfortable and asked, "But Deborah, isn't this technically his garage?" Deborah's response made my blood boil. Community property is community property, dear. Some people just need to learn how to share. That night, I sat in my living room with a cup of coffee in my laptop, watching the security camera feed I'd installed alongside the new lock system. Deborah had no idea she was being recorded as she spent another hour rearranging my tools and setting up what looked like a permanent workspace. She was so confident, so absolutely certain that she'd won this battle before it even started. The lock was set, the trap was armed, and all I needed now was the perfect timing to spring it. The trap was set. Now I just needed the perfect moment to spring it. With my fancy new garage lock system installed and ready, it was time for Phase 2 of what I was starting to think of as Operation Karma. I spent the next morning researching vacation destinations, and Hawaii kept calling my name. 10 days of beaches, sunshine, and complete relaxation while watching Deborah's world slowly collapse through my security camera app. It was almost too perfect to be real. I booked a luxury resort package on Maui. Oceanfront suites, spa treatments, snorkeling excursions, the works. The total cost was more than I'd normally spend on a vacation, but considering the entertainment value I was about to get, it seemed like a bargain. I programmed my new lock system to activate its timer on day 7 of my trip, giving Deborah just enough time to get completely comfortable and settled into her new routine before the trap snapped shut. The psychological warfare aspect of this plan was just as important as the technical side. I needed Deborah to believe she'd completely broken my spirit, that I was surrendering my garage to her superior will and authority. So I crafted the most pathetic, defeated email I could manage and sent it to her directly. "Deborah," I wrote, "you've made your point crystal clear. It's clear that I don't share your understanding of community norms. I'm taking a 10-day break to reflect on my actions and mindset. While I'm away, feel free to use the garage area to demonstrate to me how community resources ought to be handled. Maybe when I come back, I'll be a better neighbor." The response was immediate and exactly what I'd hoped for. Deborah forwarded my email to half the neighborhood with her own commentary. Finally, some people can learn when they're shown proper leadership. Connor is beginning to understand how community cooperation actually works. She even called Martha Dean and had her come over to read the email out loud like it was some kind of victory speech. I watched through my window as they stood on Deborah's front porch, laughing and high-fiving like they'd just won the lottery. But the real performance came the next day when I had to officially hand over garage access to Deborah. I walked across the street with my shoulders slumped and my best defeated expression, carrying an envelope that I claimed contained spare garage remotes and access information. Of course, the remotes were just old ones that wouldn't work with my new system, but Deborah didn't need to know that. She was too busy enjoying her moment of triumph to ask too many questions. "I really hope you'll show me how to be a better community member," I said, handing her the envelope with what I hoped looked like genuine remorse. I never realized how selfish I was being with that garage space. Deborah practically glowed with satisfaction. "Oh, Connor, don't worry. Some people just need better guidance to understand their role in the community. I'll make sure this garage is put to much better use while you're away thinking about your mistake." That evening, Deborah threw what she called a community improvement celebration in my garage. She invited 15 neighbors, set up folding chairs, and served cheap wine and grocery store cookies. I watched the whole thing through my security cameras, listening as she gave speeches about proper resource allocation and effective neighborhood leadership. One guest asked, "Deborah, what if Connor changes his mind when he gets back?" Her response was perfect. "What's he going to do? I'm HOA president, and I have documentation of his agreement to community oversight." The party was both hilarious and infuriating to watch. Deborah had completely rearranged my workshop, moved my tools around, and set up what looked like a permanent office space, complete with a desk, filing cabinet, and motivational posters about community excellence. She was treating my garage like her own personal headquarters, already planning what appeared to be regular meetings and social events in the space. Martha Dean was there with her phone, taking pictures for what she kept calling the neighborhood improvement documentation. They were creating evidence of their takeover, completely confident that they'd successfully conquered what they saw as problem property. Walter showed up briefly, but I could see him looking uncomfortable as Deborah explained her plans to restructure community resource allocation throughout the entire subdivision. The morning of my departure, I loaded my suitcase into my car with deliberately exaggerated sadness, making sure Deborah could see me through her front window. I even threw in a few dramatic sigh and shoulder slumps for good effect. As I backed out of my driveway, Deborah waved from her porch with the biggest smile I'd ever seen on her face. She had no idea she was waving goodbye to the last 7 days of happiness she'd experienced for quite a while. My flight to Maui was smooth and uneventful, and as the plane lifted off, I opened my phone to check the security camera app one more time. There was Deborah, already in my garage at 8 in the morning, rearranging furniture and setting up what looked like a permanent workspace. She was so busy enjoying her victory that she never noticed the small red light on my new garage door system, quietly counting down the days until her world would change forever. Day 7, morning in paradise. Time for my lock to introduce itself to Deborah. The first 6 days of my Hawaiian vacation were absolutely perfect. I spent my mornings on the beach, afternoons exploring the island, and evenings enjoying resort amenities that I'd only dreamed about before. But the real entertainment came from checking my security camera app throughout the day. Deborah had completely taken over my garage, treating it like her personal office and social club. She'd moved in a coffee maker, set up regular meeting times with other neighbors, and was even conducting what appeared to be official HOA business from my workbench. Every morning around 7, she'd arrive with her coffee and laptop, settling in like she was punching a time clock at her new job. She'd rearranged everything to her liking, hung up her own decorations, and had even brought in a small refrigerator for drinks and snacks. Martha Dean was there almost every day, and together they'd turned my garage into command central for their neighborhood control operations. I watched them making lists of houses to inspect, planning new rules to implement, and basically plotting how to make everyone else's life more complicated. The security cameras captured some truly amazing moments. On day 3, Deborah brought a folding table and chairs and hosted what she called a community standards workshop for 6 other neighbors. She stood at my workbench like it was a lectern, giving presentations about proper lawn maintenance and acceptable mailbox designs. The poor neighbors looked uncomfortable, but nobody was brave enough to speak up against the self-appointed neighborhood dictator. By day 5, Deborah was so comfortable that she'd started leaving personal items in the garage overnight. Family, photos on the workbench, her exercise equipment in the corner, even some of her clothes hanging on hooks where I used to keep my tools. She wasn't just using my garage, she was moving into it like a second home. I watched her giving Martha a tour on day 6, pointing out all the improvements she'd made, and discussing plans to expand her operation into my storage area. But day 7 was going to be special. I woke up in my oceanfront suite, ordered room, service breakfast, and settled onto my balcony with my phone to watch the show. The timer on my garage lock system was set to activate at exactly 6 a.m. Hawaii time, which would be 9 a.m. back in Maplewood Heights. Perfect timing for Deborah's morning routine when she'd be arriving with her coffee and laptop, expecting another day of ruling her new kingdom. At 9 a.m. sharp, I watched through the security camera as Deborah walked up to the garage door with her usual confidence. She had her arms full of supplies for another day of neighborhood management, file folders, a new motivational poster, and what looked like a small plant for her desk. She pressed the garage door button with the casual attitude of someone who'd done it dozens of times before, already mentally planning her morning tasks. The door didn't move, not even a little bit. Deborah stood there for a moment, looking confused, then pressed the button again. Nothing. She tried the remote control, pressing it multiple times with increasing frustration. Still nothing. I could see her mouth moving as she talked to herself, probably trying to figure out what was wrong with her garage door. She set down her supplies and tried the manual override, pulling on the emergency release cord and attempting to lift the door by hand. The lock system ID installed was top of the line, designed for maximum security. When it engaged, that door wasn't going anywhere without my personal authorization code. Deborah could pull, push, and pry all she wanted, but she might as well have been trying to move a mountain. After 10 minutes of increasingly frantic attempts, she pulled out her phone and started making calls. The first call was obviously to Martha Dean because within 15 minutes, Martha's car screeched into my driveway. I watched the two of them pointing at the garage door, gesturing wildly and clearly trying to figure out what had gone wrong with their perfect setup. Martha tried her own set of keys and remotes, but of course, nothing worked. They spent another 20 minutes checking windows, looking for alternative entrances, and generally acting like the world was ending. Call number 2 was apparently to a locksmith, because around 11 a.m., a van marked emergency lock service pulled up to my house. I watched a patient locksmith explain to 2 increasingly agitated women that he couldn't just break into someone else's garage without proper authorization. "Ma'am, I need written permission from the homeowner," he kept saying, while Deborah waved her hands and insisted she had every right to access the space. The locksmith left after about 30 minutes, probably tired of dealing with what was clearly a crazy situation, but Deborah wasn't giving up. Call number 3 brought a second locksmith who gave them exactly the same explanation and drove away shaking his head. By afternoon, she was on her 3rd locksmith of the day. This one charging premium rates for emergency service calls. I spent the rest of day 7 lounging by the pool, occasionally checking my phone to see Deborah and Martha taking turns pounding on the garage door like that would somehow make it open. The security cameras captured every moment of their growing desperation, from confused frustration to angry determination to what looked like the beginning of genuine panic. Deborah's perfect world was starting to crack, and she had no idea how to fix it. That evening, I treated myself to a sunset dinner cruise, watching the Hawaiian sun disappear into the Pacific while 3,000 mi away. Deborah was probably lying awake, wondering what had gone wrong with her foolproof plan to take over my garage. Tomorrow would bring day 8, and I had a feeling things were about to get much more interesting. Tomorrow I fly home to face the music. Wonder what Deborah learned during her week of thinking. Day 10 of my vacation dawned bright and beautiful, but I was actually excited to head home. The last 3 days had provided endless entertainment through my security camera app, watching Deborah's increasing desperation as locksmith after locksmith told her the same thing. They couldn't break into someone else's property without the owner's permission. She'd tried everything from calling the police to contacting city officials, but everyone kept giving her the same basic lesson in property rights that she apparently never learned in HOA President School. My flight landed at 4 in the afternoon, and I deliberately took my time getting home. I stopped for groceries, grabbed dinner at a drive-thru, and even detoured through a car wash, all while watching my phone screen show Deborah pacing around my driveway like a caged animal. By the time I finally pulled into my neighborhood, it was nearly 700 p.m., and quite a crowd had gathered. Word had spread about the garage situation, and it seemed like half the neighborhood had come out to watch the homecoming show. Deborah was standing in my driveway, surrounded by the remnants of her failed locksmith army, tools scattered on the ground, 3 different business cards crumpled in her fist, in the desperate look of someone whose perfect plan had completely fallen apart. She'd clearly been there for hours, waiting for my return, like a predator stalking its prey. The moment my car appeared around the corner, she started marching toward me, with Martha Dean trailing behind like a reluctant sidekick. "You kidnapped my car!" Before I could even exit my car, she said, "This is against the law. This is harassment." She appeared to have ran out of things to accuse, so she just stood there, panting and pointing at my garage door as if it had individually insulted every member of her family. Still sporting a vacation tan and the laid-back demeanor of someone who had spent 10 days in paradise while his worries resolved themselves, I carefully got out of my car. "Hi, Deborah," I said, trying to seem as composed as possible. She seemed to be shaken by the inquiry. "How was your week? Get a lot of community organizing done?" Her cheeks flushed, and she began to ramble on about community resources, property rights, and how I had somehow broken every rule by shutting my own garage. Martha attempted to intervene and offer assistance, but even she appeared to recognize the absurdity of the situation. I took out my phone and launched the software that managed my smart lock system, asking, "Would you like me to open the garage so you can get your car?" Deborah appeared even more perplexed by the straightforward question. It seems that she had been upset about the situation for so long that she had forgotten that asking the real owner for access to his own property was the obvious remedy. She insisted, "After you compensate me for my suffering," as though she had been the victim for a complex crime rather than the one who had been trespassing repeatedly. "I've lost work time, I've paid locksmith fees, I've been emotionally traumatized by your vindictive behavior." As the number of neighbors increased, I could see that the gathering of phones to record was undoubtedly turning into the year's biggest local celebration. I chose to link my phone to the big outside TV screen I had positioned on my back patio for movie evenings rather than argue. I said it loud enough for everyone to hear before we talked about compensation. Perhaps we ought to go over exactly what transpired here. I believe that everyone should be able to view the entire narrative. After a few taps on my phone, our neighbors could all view the surveillance footage from the previous 2 weeks as it started to play on the large screen. On that first day, the audience fell hushed when Deborah broke into my garage with her pilfered garage remote. They witnessed her moving my tools, picking up rubbish, and slowly taking over the area as if she owned it. They attended the party she hosted in my garage, where she gave a speech about how some people simply want more direction in order to comprehend their place in the community. The most harmful thing they heard was her unequivocally asserting that she had the right to occupy any area she desired, and that common stuff was community property. Mrs. Peterson whispered, "Oh my God," from 2 houses below. Other neighbors began chatting among themselves, and I could see the atmosphere change as they realized they had been witnessing a masterclass in deception and entitlement. "She actually threw a party in your garage while you were gone." As further video played, Martha Dean's voice grew progressively softer as she attempted to defend her buddy. Walter showed up beside me, beaming broadly. "Connora, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he remarked, raising his voice sufficiently to be heard by Deborah. He turned to the audience and said, "She's been bullying this neighborhood for months, and you've just shown everyone exactly who she really is. How many of you have tales like this?" Last year, she made me tear down a bird fountain that took me 20 years to perfect, just because she didn't like how it looked. The floods began to flow. Mrs. Peterson discussed the incident involving the garden gnome. Mr. Davis explained that he was fined $200 for parking his automobile in an uneven spot. According to a young couple, Deborah denied their fence permit since the design was too happy for the neighborhood. As neighbors finally felt comfortable talking about months of intimidation and harassment, story after tale came out. With professional attention, Officer Dylan Kessler, who had evidently been called to the location, viewed the security footage. Deborah's last desperate move was to demand HOA intervention, claiming that her position as president gave her special authority over community resources. "Ma'am," he said to Deborah, "you used an unauthorized garage remote to access someone else's property, held personal belongings there without permission, and refused to leave when asked. That's textbook trespassing." However, Walter only chuckled and produced a document that appeared official. "It's funny, Deborah, since yesterday, when Mrs. Peterson showed us Connor's surveillance tape, we called an emergency board meeting. With immediate effect, the board unanimously decided to remove you from the presidency. As it happens, our HR department isn't the real source of power abuse." Deborah's expression upon realizing she had lost everything nearly made the 2 weeks of frustration she had caused me worthwhile. Nearly. I was having my morning coffee in my recently recaptured garage 2 days after my homecoming spectacular when Walter knocked on the door, beaming broadly. "Connor," he said, his joy scarcely contained, "you're not going to believe this. Deborah called Channel 7 News yesterday and told them she's the victim of a high-tech harassment campaign. They're sending a crew over this morning to interview her about the dangerous cybersecurity expert who's terrorizing the neighborhood." I nearly spit out my coffee. The idea that Deborah thought she could spin this story into a victim narrative was so absurd that I couldn't help but laugh. But then I realized this could actually work in my favor. If a news crew was coming to investigate, they'd want to hear both sides of the story. And I had something Deborah didn't: actual evidence. I spent the next hour organizing my documentation, the security footage, screenshots of Deborah's harassing emails, photos of her belongings in my garage, and witness statements from neighbors about her pattern of bullying behavior. I also printed out copies of the HOA board's decision to remove her from office, complete with the official vote count and list of violations she'd committed. The Channel 7 van pulled up around 10 a.m., followed immediately by Deborah, who had apparently spent considerable time on her appearance for this television debut. She'd done her hair, put on makeup, and was wearing what looked like her most professional outfit. Martha Dean was there too, carrying a folder that probably contained her own version of events. Reporter Jessica Martinez looked like she'd rather be covering actual news instead of a suburban neighborhood dispute, but she set up her camera and began the interview. "Mrs. Langston, you claim that your neighbor has used technology to harass and intimidate you. Can you tell us what happened?" Deborah launched into her prepared speech about community cooperation and resource sharing, painting herself as a dedicated public servant who'd been victimized by a vindictive neighbor with too much technical knowledge. "He trapped my car in his garage using some kind of high-tech security system," Deborah said, managing to sound both outraged and pitiful at the same time. "I'm just trying to help our community make better use of shared resources, and he's using intimidation tactics to silence neighborhood leadership. It is, simply put, cyberbullying." After giving a sympathetic nod, Jessica posed the query that made all the difference. "Is this the garage in which your car was stuck, Mrs. Langston?" For an instant, Deborah's self-assured face wavered. "Well, no. Although it is officially his property, I am in charge of allocating communal resources as president of the HOA." Jessica raised her eyebrows. "Yow, you don't have permission to park your car in someone else's garage?" From there, the interview quickly took a turn for the worse. Deborah's entitled behavior was exposed on every level by Jessica's questions. Deborah was forced to acknowledge that the garage remote belonged to the prior owner when questioned about it. When questioned about authorization, she asserted that she had unique rights because of her HOA membership, which she didn't have. She attempted to portray the party she had hosted in my garage as a community improvement meeting when questioned about it. Jessica then invited me to do an interview. I approached with my evidence folder and my best composed expression. "Walsh, Mr. You have been bothering Mrs. Langston," she says. "What are your thoughts on these accusations?" With a composed face, I gave her a tablet that was filled with security footage. The evidence, in my opinion, speaks for itself. Do you want to witness what really transpired? Jessica viewed footage of Deborah breaking into my garage, hosting parties, leaving trash, and basically treating my property like her own kingdom while the camera filmed. Her face changed as she became aware that the story she had been told was wholly false. She called Mrs. Langston over. Martha Dean attempted to intervene with damage control, but it was too late. "Can you explain why you're on camera throwing a party in Mr. Walsh's garage while he was out of town?" she said. The floodgates flowed once more when Jessica began questioning the other neighbors who had gathered about their experiences with Deborah's leadership. Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Davis, and 6 other residents related their experiences of intimidation, high penalties, and harassment. When Walter produced the formal HOA board resolution dismissing Deborah from her position, it was the coup d'etat. After watching Mr. Walsh's surveillance tape, we called an urgent meeting. The board unanimously decided that Mrs. Langston had misused her position and broken several HOA rules, he told the camera. She is no longer permitted to represent our community. Deborah seemed to realize how badly this was going, but Jessica turned back to her for an answer. She was backing towards her car as if she wanted to get away, and her face was flushed. She yelled, "This is all lies!" She then got into her car and drove away, leaving Martha standing by herself with a camera aimed at her face. "He's manipulated everyone against me. I'll sue this entire neighborhood." The title of the piece, HOA President Abuses Power, Gets Locked Out, ran that evening. All of the best clips were shown in the segment. Deborah's interview meltdown, her party in my garage, and the neighbors' celebration of her dismissal. With comments that ranged from encouraging to downright nasty, the article became popular on the internet and was shared hundreds of times. However, the actual repercussions were only getting started. Following the press coverage, Deborah's insurance provider opened an inquiry into her professional behavior. The fact that their employee was featured in a widely shared film regarding power abuse and property crimes did not sit well with her managers. After a week, she was put on indefinite suspension while her professional conduct and client relationships were reviewed. Meanwhile, something that had not been felt in months was happening in the neighborhood: calm. After being voted as the HOA's temporary president, Walter's first official action was to do away with Deborah's harsh penalties and harassment guidelines. The communal garden was brought back to life. Instead of fleeing from the HOA enforcement police, people actually began talking to each other again when Mrs. Peterson got her gnomes back. There was one more card Deborah needed to play. However, there are instances where your final card simply demonstrates why you are losing the game. I felt it was time for a genuine celebration 2 weeks after the news crew fiasco. The turnout was amazing. I invited every home in Maplewood Heights to a garage reclamation barbecue with the tagline, "Come celebrate community resources being used for actual community purposes." I set up grilling stations, borrowed tables and chairs from neighbors, and hung a banner across my garage that said, "Garage officially unstolen." 43 neighbors, including a few families I had never known before, showed up. As it happened, many people were scared to attend community gatherings because of Deborah's reign of terror. But now that she was gone, everyone was eager to socialize once more. Mrs. Peterson's well-known potato salad was brought. The young couple with the rejected fence brought handmade cupcakes adorned as little garages, and Mr. Davis put together a playlist of music. Walter utilized the event to announce some significant policy changes in his new capacity as HOA president. "First," he continued, speaking to the assembly from my desk, which had been Deborah's command center, "all punitive sanctions for minor infractions are being eliminated. No more $200 fines for having the incorrect mailbox color or parking a little crookedly." In fact, the audience cheered. "Second, we're putting in place a system of neighbor mediation," he added. "If disagreements arise, we will resolve them amicably and without coercion or harassment. Third, term restrictions will be applied to all HOA offices. No more autocratic local governments." Another round of applause. And for the first time in months, I saw folks truly happy and unwinding. Everyone was taken aback when Martha Dean arrived, bearing a plate of brownies and an official apology. She told the gathering, "I want everyone to know that I was wrong to support Deborah's behavior. I contributed to the propagation of false information about Connor and other neighbors after being entangled in the drama and rumors. Through a new project I'm launching called Neighbor Kindness, we will put more effort into supporting one another rather than whining." When we noticed a familiar U-Haul truck rolling up to Deborah's mother's house across the street, the party was going great. Deborah appeared to be moving out permanently since we could see her loading boxes and furniture through the windows. As the last chapter of our local drama played out, the whole BBQ crowd fell silent for a while. No one approached to offer assistance, no one bid her farewell, and no one appeared to be too upset about her leaving. Mrs. Peterson inquired, more curious than worried, "Where do you think she's moving?" Walter gave a shrug. Deborah found a tiny flat 3 states away, according to something her mother said. After the news coverage, it seems that her insurance position didn't work out, and she needs to start anew somewhere that isn't familiar with her narrative. My phone rang with a text message from an unknown number, as if I were on cue. To the group, I read it aloud. I appreciate you stopping her. Deborah did this exact same thing during our marriage, and I'm her ex-husband. She made enemies everywhere we lived, targeted our neighbors, and refused to acknowledge that she was the issue. She refused to listen to my pleas for assistance. Perhaps this is the wake-up call she's been waiting for. Everything was put into perspective by the message. This wasn't just a disagreement about a garage or HOA dues. This concerned a pattern of conduct that has been harming communities and relationships for years. In addition to solving my own issue, confronting Deborah's bullying may have prevented dozens of other victims from experiencing the same abuse in the future. As the celebration was coming to an end around sundown, I found myself standing in my garage and observing the change. Neighbors were quietly chatting, and foldable tables were strewn with food scraps where Deborah had set up her control center. Where she had displayed her inspirational posters about excellence in the community, the young couple was preparing to depart when they came up to me. Walter had posted a simple sign that said, "Neighbors helping neighbors." "Connor," the husband said, "we just wanted to thank you for what you did. We were actually thinking about moving because Deborah made our lives so miserable. Now we're excited to stay and be part of a real community." His wife nodded and added, "We've learned something important. You don't have to be anyone's victim, even if they have an official title." As the last neighbors headed home, Walter helped me clean up the garage. "You know," he said, folding chairs and stacking plates, "I've been thinking about converting half of this space into a community workshop. Nothing fancy, just a place where neighbors can borrow tools, work on projects together, maybe teach each other new skills." I loved the idea immediately. My garage, which had been the source of so much conflict, could become a symbol of genuine community cooperation. Over the next few weeks, that's exactly what happened. We set up a tool-sharing program, started hosting monthly Fix-It workshops, and even began teaching neighborhood kids basic repair skills. The space that Deborah had tried to steal for her own power trip became something much better. A real community resource that brought people together instead of driving them apart. 6 months later, I received an official letter from the Maplewood Heights HOA. Walter had nominated me for the annual Community Service Award, citing my role in restoring neighborhood harmony and demonstrating that individual rights and community cooperation can coexist peacefully. The award came with a small plaque that now hangs in my garage workshop, right where Deborah used to keep her motivational posters about community excellence. Sometimes I think about that 10-day vacation and how perfectly everything worked out. Deborah thought she was punishing me by stealing my garage, but she actually gave me the perfect opportunity to teach her about consequences. Smart planning really does beat loud arguing every time. And communities really do work better when everyone understands the rules. And speaking of rules, here's the most important one I learned from this whole experience. You don't have to be anyone's victim, no matter how official their title sounds or how entitled their behavior seems. Sometimes bullies just need to meet someone who's willing to be smarter instead of louder. Best vacation I ever took. And I didn't even have to leave the country to get justice. Anyone else have HOA horror stories? I'd love to hear how you handled your neighborhood drama in the comments below. Remember, standing up for yourself isn't just about winning, it's about making sure the next person doesn't have to go through the same thing.